You've heard about bad neighbors, right? You've heard about people who are crappy to live next to. Well, let me tell you, you haven't heard anything until you've heard what happened to me. My neighbor, he ran over my dog and wouldn't even apologize. Now I have to see him every day, and he just gives me this little sneer. I can't even say what I'd like to do to him.
I have this partner, you see. Well, I had this partner. We were together 8 years. 8 years. And then she decided, after all we'd been through, that her work was more important than me. This job came along and she knew I couldn't move, and she went ahead and took the job. She said it'd be just for a while, but she knew I couldn't move. I couldn't leave the practice I'd developed all these years, and she just left. 2 weeks later, she's gone. Half the home we made together is 3 states away, just like that. She asked me to visit. She said she'd come back, but no.
I get up at night and I think about him. Donnie, that's my neighbor's name. Sometimes I turn off the lights and I pull up the blinds and I just watch his house. I think about what it'd be like to throw something across those few feet and break one of his windows. One night, I even went out to see if I could let the air out of the tires of his car that ran over Jerry, my Irish setter. His car was in the garage, but I keep watching. I'm up nights watching.
She said that we could keep being a couple. It would just be different. Maybe not forever, but different. Lots of couples live across a long distance, she said. But that wasn't what I wanted. In my mind, if you're a couple, you live in the same place, in the same house, in the same community, the same one I've been in for 10 years. And she knew that. She knew I wasn't going to leave.
This guy, this Donnie, he ruined my life. Not only did he kill my poor old dog, who was blind as a bat and just so sweet, but he's also ruined my health. I'm up watching him, like I said, and I just don't get any sleep. And even if I did, I think I dream about him because when I wake up, I'm clenching my jaws. I mean, if you think this guy hasn't just killed me, my dentist says I cracked 2 teeth.
She said we'd never even talked about it. She said she never made a commitment to stay here forever. But she knew me, and she knew it wasn't something I would ever change. All my roots are here. And then she just up and leaves. It's so unfair. It was like she couldn't see what I needed at all.
People say I should forgive him, but I never will.
My friends say it's time to move on, but how can I move on? She took half my life with her. I'm supposed to just get over that?
My blood pressure's in the watch out for a stroke zone now. Of course, we all know that pets are good for reducing stress. Dear old Donnie took care of that, didn't he?
I don't even go out anymore. The friends we used to have as a couple, I don't even want to see anymore.
He ruined my life. He keeps ruining it every day.
My friends say I should forgive her, that this is hurting me more than it's hurting her, which might be true since she has a new partner. It's only been 2 years and she just moved on. And then they say I can use this to look at what my part was in causing our breakup. I didn't have a part. I was the victim and she moved on.
I'm just going to keep watching and remembering. They think I should forgive and condone what he did.
Forgive so we can be friends again and pretend she didn't rip my heart out. I don't think so.
Why should I give him the satisfaction of forgiving him?
Forgiveness. It's not just some soft, feel-good topic, is it? Sometimes, when we think about it, we may not want to engage with it, but by the end of the morning, I'm just going to tell you this at the beginning, my goal is to keep each and every one of us from the fate of our 2 readers, and also from the fate of the woman whose doctor, after telling her that she would die soon from being bitten by a rabid dog, began to watch her write out a very long list. "Are you putting your affairs in order?" he asked her. "Yes," she replies. "I am making a list of all the people I'm going to bite before I go." Forgiveness. Life and death hang in its balance. Sometimes the life of the person who committed the wrong, and today I will argue, always the life of the person who was wronged. Forgiveness. A mother forgives the 16-year-old who killed her son simply because that child was from a rival school and a knife happened to be handy. A man surrenders the right to revenge deep within his family's DNA and instead forgives those who murdered his father. A brother forgives the older brother who abused him repeatedly through childhood. This is why forgiveness is such an important topic, because it touches us both personally and in our larger world. It is not the easiest topic to discuss, but it is a deeply religious issue. Because whether we can forgive or not can determine whether we can claim back our life after we face disappointment, loss, injury, or even the loss of one of our most precious. The need to forgive others and to forgive ourselves is a basic part of being human. Perhaps this is why the Jewish congregations take time right after Rosh Hashanah, right after the beginning of the new liturgical year, to think about their own failings and falling short, to try to acknowledge them and wipe the slate clean through Yom Kippur. That is a little different way to start a new year than nursing a hangover, isn't it? In our Universalist heritage, which is descended from those same Jewish roots, is the idea that all are saved, that all are capable of doing good. And at our last General Assembly, which is when we get together once a year to consider ideas among ourselves, my colleague and former seminary roommate, Michael Tino, says that this heritage means that we have a religious mandate to be forgiving. He says this: Universalism promises us that we are all forgiven, that whether or not we want to be, whether or not we wish others to do so, we must forgive others and we must forgive ourselves. We live in a society that encourages us to see all that is wrong in ourselves and then promises us that if we buy enough stuff, we can make it right. Universalism asks us to see past those harmful messages of self-loathing and judgment, feel the spirit of love and wholeness that flow through it all. Forgiveness. Why do so many traditions spend time on this topic? I think it boils down to two basic reasons. One, surprise, forgiving others isn't easy. And two, also a surprise to many of us, forgiving others isn't impossible. There are ways to do it, but they are ways we must teach ourselves. It can be taught. The choice to forgive rests ultimately with each of us. Fred Luskin has a career's worth of studying the impacts of those who can forgive and those who can't. And in his Stanford-based research, he sees again and again, both in his work with interpersonal conflicts and in larger conflicts, such as those in Northern Ireland or Sierra Leone, that not forgiving hurts the one who can't forgive more than anyone else. And I would suggest that our collective inability to forgive hurts our world. Now, how does this work? Luskin says it's simple. The person who's been wrong creates a grievance. And what is a grievance? A grievance occurs when there is a wrong and it becomes not just a normal focus, which every wrong must be in our own life, but something larger. It starts to take up more and more room. He says you start to pay more and more rent to the grievance. It begins to take up all the room, excessive room in the wronged person's life. So all too often, in fact, the grievance can become the person's life, taking it over and becoming the dominant force. We can rent a grievance the master bedroom and build a hot tub in the back, he says. Some of you may know how this feels. Luskin offers seminars, one of which was offered here many years ago, and he observes that an interesting fact, which we can decide whether or not we want to verify looking around our own enlightened congregation, but he says that when the marketing and outreach for his gatherings on forgiveness have just the word forgiveness in them, the vast majority of the participants who attend are only women. When the publicity talks about letting go of grudges, then there's a more equal distribution among the genders. But whatever you call it, the point is that living in the kind of perpetual anger that a grievance engenders takes a toll on one's body. It increases the risk of stress-induced illnesses, like that poor man mourning his dog, heart attacks and strokes. It lowers the body's natural immunity to disease, and it's been proven scientifically again and again. People stuck in a grievance, a wrong they cannot forgive or move beyond, not only suffer these effects, they lose friends, they lose jobs, they grow depressed, and often they fall victim to addictions. So what can be done? Well, Luskin says the good news is forgiveness can be taught. There are a couple things that are key. The ability to recognize that once that initial period of anger has passed, what continues to harm you is not actually the original act, the taking of the cookie, right? It's not that, or even the kicking of the shins. The original act is not the problem. It is your feelings towards what has happened, which you can't let go of. To be able to let go of these emotions is what's required for forgiveness. And that's what he describes as the peace and understanding that comes from blaming that which hurts you less, taking the life experience less personally, and eliminating that grievance story. So to forgive requires that you can substitute something for the focus that has been on that wrong. And there are stress reduction and simple meditative techniques that can do this. This is what he says. He says, remember that a life well lived is your best revenge. Instead of focusing on your wounded feelings and thereby giving the person who caused you pain power over you, learn to look for love, for beauty, for kindness around you, because forgiveness is about claiming your personal power. To truly forgive, he says, people have to give up what he calls unenforceable rules. Now, what are these? What are unenforceable rules? Well, these are rules to which we have no way of making people or the world around us adhere. And yet we hold them anyway. An example of this is life should be fair. I think we all agree with this. Life should be fair, right? Does anyone would like to argue that life shouldn't be fair? We can talk about it afterwards in the Borton Hall. But the point is this. We have no power to ensure that life is always fair. Another common example is that people should not lie to me. It is true, people should not lie to me, but sometimes they do. And I cannot keep them from doing that. My partner should be faithful. My past should be different than it was. These are not unreasonable expectations, and yet they are beyond our control, so they are unenforceable. People's misconceptions about forgiveness can keep them trapped. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation, especially if abuse has happened. It means letting go of the part that is holding you captive to your abuser. Forgiveness does not mean condoning. And we just passed, once again, the anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And after his brother was killed in those attacks, Andrew Rice found, after indulging his anger for a couple years, that he could heal more through forgiveness than by holding on to that anger, however justifiable it was. My attitude isn't all altruistic, he says. Of course I'm angry, but there's a spiritual supremacy. I'm protecting my brother's spirit by putting a barricade around him. I'm refusing to fall in line with what they want, which is visceral hatred on two sides, which gives me the permission to reconcile. And I notice that those people crying loudest for retribution, so often seem to be those least affected. So there's forgiveness. And there's also this related concept of atonement. Atonement, which is really the core practice of Yom Kippur. To forgive ourselves, which is part of that act of forgiveness, we must be willing to face and atone for our missings of the mark. Because when we unpack the story, it might have been our unreasonable expectations about what our partner would give up for our life, or how someone else would understand our needs that often also play into the truth. Harold Kushner says the practice of atonement is important because we need to recognize again and again that as human beings, we're going to make mistakes. He says the Hebrew scriptures don't make a major pronouncement about whether man is sinful or good for that matter, because it's not primarily a book about what people believe. It's a book about how people live. And he points out that more than half of the books in the Hebrew scriptures are actually tales of people who he describes as weak, rebellious, and sometimes faithful. So what would our world be like if people were able to be forgiving, to atone for the things that they do, the mistakes they make, however unconsciously or unintentionally? How would our world be different? How would our global justice system operate if we had an ethic based not on revenge against those who have wronged us, but rather an ethic that we, too, should understand, forgive, and when we have wronged, make amends for our misdeeds? Asad Emil Shafardi served as a senior intelligence official in the Christian militia during the Lebanese Civil War for 15 years until 1990. In that role, he was responsible for ordering the killings of many, many people. In the year 2000, he wrote a letter apologizing to his victims, which was published extensively in the national media of his area. But that wasn't where he started out when he first started thinking about this road of reconciliation. That happened when he was first invited to meet with some representative of the group that he had always considered his sworn enemy. And this is what he said. I was told that some Muslims would be there, and so I'd prepared a very long list of grievances, and when my turn came to speak, I took out that list. But as I read it, everyone around me just smiled. And later, a Muslim explained that he had brought an even longer list. I discovered many things at those meetings. I discovered Muslims had real names, and they had families and dreams and expectations, and that if we didn't have the same political opinion, at least we could still respect each other. And yet still, he kept this very disquieting revelation very close to his chest for a number more years. He knew now that Muslims were a lot like him, just people, just trying to do their thing and have their life, until something more personal happened. And this is what he says. In the year 2000, my son was 13, and I heard him repeating some very ugly words about Muslims. And I was so shocked because this could have been me 40 years earlier. And I said to myself, do we really need another civil war for my son's generation to discover that this way of thinking is wrong? And I realized that nothing was going to change if people like me who had discovered the truth kept it to myself. And so after some days later, I decided to write an open letter in the press to the Lebanese people asking for their forgiveness. And since then, I've given over my life to working for peace, even if it means sometimes making great sacrifices. I would venture into the jaws of hell if my story could shift just one person's views and move them away from violence. Now, my friend Michael Tino is beloved to me for many things. One of them is that he was one of the few people that wanted to live with me when I was in seminary and would come with a 1-year-old child who would throw squash around on our papers as we were studying. But he's also very dear to me this year for reminding us about this part of our universalist heritage. He says that forgiveness is our mandate. It is our religious mandate to ourselves, to those around us, and to our wider world. He reminds us that not only does our heritage say that all have worth, which requires us to honor that worth through forgiveness, but it also says we're all going to the same place when we die, and that place is not hell. Michael is a physicist, and he could talk a lot about this at an atomic level, which actually I might not be able to forgive. But he also reminds us that the heaven that we have to create is here on this earth, and that the basic building block that we have is love, beauty, and love, gratitude, and unity walk with us. And these are the basic building blocks of our heritage. This one and precious world that we inhabit needs us to wrestle anew again and again with the age-old concept of forgiveness, and to bring to it our legacy, to practice the time-honored discipline of thinking about what we can let go of, to avoid the hells that we create for ourselves and those around us when we cannot forgive. I want to end with Michael's words, and he says this: "The love in our midst is big, really, really big. Furthermore, universalism promises us that our weaknesses, however big or small they are immaterial in the light of that love." I'll say it again. A universalist theology of forgiveness promises us that whatever is wrong with us is of no consequence to the ultimate source of life in the universe. Now that is an inheritance that we should share with the world. May we be the ones to make it so.